For it. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Outside the Box, the podcast devoted to supporting Central PA small business. Today, we're going to be talking about how to accomplish your physical fitness goals. And you saw I put in the thumbnail about gains, and I'm looking to make some gains. I'm trying to reach a certain climbing level. So I'm going to talk to you about that. Maybe you have some tips for me to strengthen my climbing muscles. We have Brock with us from Next Generation Personal Training. I'm your host, Derek Bixler, realtor and digital marketing geek right here in Central PA. I grew up on the Hill in Harrisburg, went to Mechanicsburg High School, went up to Penn College of Technology in Williamsport. We talked about that off camera a little bit. I won't trash it any more than I already did. No, it was a great school. 100 million% placement, I think is what I said. Contact me if you need to buy or sell a home. You can text me, email me, call me, throw a rock through my window, send a carrier pigeon, whatever you need to do. We still need inventory. If you want to subscribe to our emails, one email a week to get networking mixer updates and invites, episode announcements, and exclusive special offers, of which you will have one from Brock today. Go to supportcentralpa.com to sign up for that. A reminder to, if you have a question or you know either of us, put a question in the comments. If we don't see it during the episode, we'll come back later and address it, or just say where you're watching from, because Central PA is kind of a big place. So say if you're watching from Gettysburg or Hershey or Lancaster or Lemoyne or wherever you're watching from, hit us up. And a reminder to that all the replays are on YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And like I talked about again with Brock before we got on here, soon on iTunes and Spotify and all those audio player places as soon as we get around to putting those up. So without further ado, I will bring in Brock of Next Generation Personal Training. Hello, Brock. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And I was saying we don't have a lot of PM episodes that much, so we should have a little bit more viewership, I think. And I'm watching the ticker right now, and it is a couple more than usual. So that's good. Let's start with tell everybody where you grew up and what high school. You went to Wyalusing. Am I saying that right? That's where you grew up?
Wyalusing High School. Yeah, not to be confused with Wyalusing, which is like out by Reading. A lot of people think that. So I grew up in northern PA, a town called Wyalusing, small town, graduated class of about 100 people back in 2003, and played all sorts of sports in high school, did football, wrestling, track, lettered in all of them. I really enjoyed it. And as far as like home life, a couple things, I know you mentioned you want to talk a little bit about that. And I had great parents growing up. My dad was, really great work ethic. That's the one thing I can say that he taught me more than anything else. My dad works his butt off to provide for his family, and he taught us that for sure. The downside of that is he wasn't able to come to a lot of the sporting events, but my mom made all that type of stuff, right, which is really cool. So had a passion for all those types of sports growing up. I ended up going to Lock Haven University, and there I actually started out as a criminal justice major, transitioned out of that pretty quickly to pre-PT, and then eventually to athletic training and sports medicine. And while I was there, I actually did pick up boxing as a sport, because I figured, why not try something else, something a little bit different. And I don't know if you know much about Lock Haven, but their football program is pretty terrible. And it's not the non-school, this is what it is. They didn't win a single game all 4 years that I was there. So, yeah, pretty bad. Right. So I remember they won a game.
To pay the students to go to the games. Free food, free hot dogs.
Seriously, it was pretty bad. I remember they won a game maybe 2009 was the first game they had won in like 6 years. Then there was this huge celebration. They had newspaper articles, all online articles about it, because they had finally won a game. So are
they better now?
I actually don't know. I don't pay too much attention anymore. I'm not really sure if their wrestling program's a little bit better. They're D1 in wrestling. So the wrestling was probably their top sport at the time. Again, I'm not really sure if they're good now or not. So, and then from there, ended up moving down to the Harrisburg area. I guess it's been 2007-ish, and actually did nothing in my field for the longest time. I did construction, I did roofing, I did landscape work, just whatever I had to do to pay the bills at the time. And I wasn't certified in training, none of that type of stuff. And I ended up getting a hold of someone who actually was an early on mentor of mine in this industry. Her name's Stacy Dronzik. I'll give her an honorable mention. She taught me a lot of stuff in this industry. And she gave me a chance to kind of pursue my passion, because I always enjoyed this. I always loved working out and exercising. And I mean, that was from a young age. I started working out when I was probably about 14, 15 years old. And partly because of sports, but also I used to get bullied in school. As I said, all kids did at some point in time, I think. And I remember one of the upperclassmen football players said to me on the bus the one day, he's like, if you start working out and getting stronger, they won't be able to do that to you all the time. And that was like this, background motivation to also start working out and get stronger. So eventually I could defend myself, you know what I mean? So fast forward into, obviously I was into training. So for now about 12 years, so I worked at an independent studio for quite some time. Some stuff went south there. And then I moved on to another gym, which is called New York Fitness in Mechanicsburg, about 7 years ago. And that's actually when I started my own company. So I run my company out of New York Fitness. And actually, I'm going to be transitioning out of there here very shortly. But I've been there for now 7 years and building out my company. I have a couple employees now that work for me that are awesome, great trainers. And we can obviously dive some more and all that stuff, but that's kind of the fast track of how I got here.
So I want to know, you said you played all the sports pretty much in high school, and you said there was 100 people in your class, which is like a third of my class, and my class wasn't that big in Mechanicsburg. So what did you play, like literally all the sports? Or maybe start with what was the first sport you started playing when you were younger, when you were probably before you were 14? When you said workout, sorry, I keep rambling, but when you said workout, I'm assuming that's when you started like consciously thinking about it, and maybe lifting weights was included at that point.
Correct. Yeah. So actually, which is funny, like I look at my parents now and I'm like, I wonder why they made some of the choices they did. So like I wanted to start sports early, like younger. I wanted to wrestle in elementary school, like in first and second grade. And they're like, "Oh, your bones are too brittle. You shouldn't be doing that right now." I'm like it's just funny this stuff now because I have a 6-year-old who's in martial arts and they do live sparring already. You know what I mean? So it's just a different philosophy and mindset, right? So
they always told me you can't, if you lift too young, it'll stunt your growth or whatever. And everybody would point to the short ripped guy, but there were tall ripped kids too. So it didn't make any sense.
Yeah. So, and we can even address that sometime during the podcast here. So, cause that is a big misconception about that. So then I actually got I played a year of basketball real early on in school. I can't even remember what grade it was. And then it wasn't necessarily I played a lot of sports early on because my friends went out for those sports. I was like, cool, if we're all going to do something together, let's do it. Then did flag football. And then I started wrestling in fifth grade, wrestling and then football. And then I took those through high school. Then I did track 9th through 12th grade. I ended up stopped wrestling in 10th grade and then just did football track up until my senior year. And I was pretty decent. It's not like nothing to brag on, but we have in District 4, we have a North-South All-Star game. So I made the All-Star team, all type of stuff. And it was a good time. I placed in districts. I won districts in javelin. So we did, I was okay, but it was also a real small school, right? So in comparison, down here, no one even know my name, right? So.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, I was thinking wrestling was going to be one of the ones because that would make sense that boxing might spark your interest once you got to college. So is that why it kind of appealed to you? Their football team sucked, or you just didn't want to go out for the football team, or what happened?
So that was part of it. And actually, I loved playing football. That was probably my favorite sport. But MMA kind of started then too, and it was like. It was starting to come on the scene a little bit, and I always loved, combat sports and all that type of stuff. So my roommate and I were like, let's try out for the boxing team. And so actually, Block Haven's boxing team is not part of the university. It's actually a club, but they're still sponsored by the university, but it's a club sport, but they're phenomenal. They've won nationals multiple times. I mean, their collegiate sport would be wrestling for sure. As far as as the college, but their club sports, boxing may be their best sport because the 4 years that I was there, they won team nationals 2 or maybe 3 years that I was there. So they're very phenomenal. So
did you fought in competitions and whatnot?
Actually, I did not. So I ended up, so it was only my senior year, and I'm not trying. You get only 1 year of boxing in, you're not good enough. In most cases, you're not boxing being good enough to be part of the starting team. So I did it, but it was fun. It just is what it is, But I learned a ton, and it definitely gave me even way more respect for the sport than ever before. I remember my first sparring match was against a 2-time national champ, and I got destroyed. Like I was big and strong, but it did not matter. Like the technique and everything, it was very, very humbling. I got my bell rung serious, so.
Yeah,
But,
just when you think you're cool or you can fight,
yeah.
you get in the ring with somebody that actually knows how, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
no, I can't even do this at all. That's cool. So what kind of training was involved for boxing?
So all high intensity type stuff. So a lot of bag work, speed bag work, heavy bag work, conditioning is huge. I would compare it very similar to wrestling conditioning, other than the things that are different are the techniques of the sport, right? But as far as work ethic of the sport, up until that point, wrestling was the hardest thing I'd ever done as far as conditioning is concerned. And that's very comparative with boxing. But other than that, and then a lot of pad work, hand work, that type of stuff. But that was generally as a full class. Then we would do one-on-one type stuff for punching combinations, that type of thing. So,
is there any fighting or football or baseball or anything in the family? You said your dad had a really strong work ethic. So did he play any sports, or any of this come from him at all, or your mom or somebody else?
I don't really. My dad's a hothead, if that counts for anything. Or was. He's better now, but it's what my dad. My dad had a rough life. His grandfather did. So my dad actually started working at like age 12, right? So he never had a chance to play sports, worked on a farm growing up. And I mean, that's probably why he had a great work ethic. And then he joined the military for a while. So my dad was in the Army, as was my grandfather and my brother. So I don't know where it necessarily came from, but I always just enjoyed it. And my son enjoys it now too. So whether it's in the blood or I'm trying not to convince him that he needs to do something he doesn't want to. I'm going to try everything, right? He tried soccer. That wasn't, but he's loving martial arts right now. So.
Yeah, and fighting, for lack of a better term, is a great workout. People underestimate, like you did with the boxing. You underestimate what all goes into it and how tiring 2 minutes can be, or 1 minute, or even 30 seconds or so could be. So did you do anything outside of the fitness world once you got out of school? What did you major in at Lock Haven?
So the original they actually changed it while I was there. Originally, it was just called sports medicine. And then they changed the program to athletic training. So which is like you see athletic trainers out in the football fields or in any type of sport, so to speak. So it's a lot of class work with learning how to do tapings and ultrasounds and stim and like all that type of stuff, right? So yeah, and Lock Haven's program for that is pretty serious. And I think they only accept just a handful of students every year into the program. And the year that I was, basically you have to do a test and a practical and a live practical to be able to get in. And I was one of the few, thankfully, that was able to get in during the year that I was there. So.
And what's the goal of most people going into that field? Are they looking to be like the trainer at a high school or high school first, and then they move up to a college and then an NFL team or something? Or
I think that's the most. So this is like the thing that you realize after you're like almost done with school is, wow, like there's not a lot of jobs that pay well in this field, right? So at the time, athletic training as far as like schools, I never had when I was in high school. We didn't have an athletic trainer part of our staff, and a lot of high schools still don't because it's extra money, it's part of the budget, all this type of stuff. Now bigger schools can afford them, but athletic trainers start out like $25,000 a year working for a high school, which is, it's not a great income. Of course, if you work for the pros, you can make a couple $100,000 a year doing it, but the process to get there, I think, is pretty extensive. So even when I was done with school, I pretty much was like, well, I don't know if I want to do. And also, here's another thing too. Once you're in that field, it's like, do I just want to tape ankles all the time, which is a lot of what it is? And do I want to hook up stim on people? Do I want to do that for the rest of my life?
Ice baths and
yeah, I just kind of, that's why I actually changed that to physical therapy too. I'm like, I don't want to work on injured people all the time, so that's why I changed my route to get into personal training. So.
And you said you started at New York Fitness with your gym, and maybe you could explain that a little bit. How does that work when trainers, it's not your gym, but you can train there, and can you train at multiple gyms, and how does all that work?
Sure. So I started out in a studio. I started at a smaller gym in Lemoyne first, and then I went to a studio. But generally speaking, there's not a lot of gyms that allow independent trainers to come and work in the facility. Most of them that have their own hired trainers. Like if you go to an LA Fitness or a Gold's or a Crunch, they have their own staff that do. Now the problem with work, I think it's great for early on trainers for experience, but the gym keeps the majority of the income, usually pay the trainers average at best when they're the ones doing all the work, right? So I think it's great for experience, but long term, I think for a lot of people, it would be nice for them to get out on their own. But also, sometimes people don't want the responsibility of, figuring all their taxes out and all the type of stuff, right? More responsibility, right? So
you learn how to sell at those jobs too. LA Fitness,
yeah,
they force you to sit there and call that list of people and sell them a training package. Yep. So if nothing for that, it might be good for that.
Yeah. So, and I'm not knocking that, but the unique thing about when I went to New York Fitness was one of the gyms in the area that allowed independent trainers. So essentially I pay rent into the gym and I can then build my business as large as I want to. And there's very little liability because I don't own the building. I don't have to worry about, any of that type of stuff. The liability becomes just between myself and my clients and my own trainers that I hire. So
is that kind of their niche? Is that a thing at New York Fitness that they attract independent trainers who train there, and then their business model is the money that you pay to train there?
Correct. Yeah, because there's a ton of extra revenue that comes into the gym other than just their memberships, for sure. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. So if you want an independent trainer, go to New York Fitness. Is that fair to say? Or they have their own also?
This is public now. So this is what's great. What I talked about, I'm transitioning out soon, is the gym's actually being sold on September 1st. So they're going to be owned by Platinum Fitness, which they do have their own company. And the independents could have stayed there, but it just didn't make sense for a lot of the trainers to stay. So I'm working with a couple of people. We're partnering. We're actually going to be opening up a gym in the near future. Hopefully within the next 3 to 4 months, we'll be opening up our own facility. So.
Oh, nice. So you get a collective of other trainers together and pull your money and figure out a place to train.
Yeah, because we all work well together. We get along well together. And again, it's just a unique thing that we don't have to worry about working for some. We all can work for ourselves, right? And we all get along. We work great as a community. So.
And so let's tell a little bit about what you offer. Obviously, people have some kind of idea of personal training in their head, but each personal trainer has their own way to go about it and your own niche or people that you like to train or methods of training or whatever. Yeah. So maybe just go into what training with you would be like.
So I like to think we're a little bit different than a lot of different trainers. I've been in the industry for a while. I've seen a lot of different trainers and training styles and companies and et cetera, et cetera. And the one thing that we pride ourselves on is, one, we're very science-based. So all of our trainers, we all go through an extensive process, certain education process. So we're not all doing like a bunch of different stuff, right? And we're very focused on the nuanced things that make training really, really good, right? So it's not just about exercise. Like tons of people come to the gym and they exercise, right? They do a machine, they do this, they do that with no real necessarily goal, or even they think they have a goal, it's not necessarily defined enough or even in depth enough to get the results that they're looking for. So we work on optimizing those results, right? From everything, from the proper program, the proper nutrition, pairing those things together. We can get into a lot of depth of this type of stuff, but that's our approach. And that way people aren't wasting their money. And if anyone's ever looked up training, it's not an inexpensive thing, right? So, and this is one of the things in the industry, this is challenging. Like, it's hard to vet what is a good trainer or a bad trainer. You can look at the pricing, that doesn't necessarily mean anything per se, and you wouldn't even know if you had a chance to train with trainer A unless you had a chance to train with trainer B to know any type of difference, right? Most people come into the gym, they don't know anything. So something better than knowing nothing, they think that they're getting a good experience, so to speak, right? So that's where we really come in and we dial down in and really focus on optimizing people's experience, focusing on form, technique, execution, the nutrition side of stuff, but also at the same time, knowing that we're actually working with a live human being that's not a robot, then they have real life things that they have to deal with, stress, life, work, school, all this type of stuff. So then we also manage expectations of, okay, so here's best case scenario, but here's also what your life looks like plugged in that scenario. So here's what we can really look at as your results are probably going to look like. So.
And what does the intake process, I'll call it, look like when somebody comes to you and says, I have said goal, and maybe you could name a few goals: losing weight, training for a marathon. I don't know what else would be, but somebody comes to you with a goal. I need somebody to help me get to this goal. What does that intake process look like? Are there certain questions that you're asking them each time to figure out the nutrition and all this stuff?
100%. So every time we offer consultations for everyone. So we sit down with them. It's complimentary. No one has to pay for it. Because again, we have to find out if it's going to be a good relationship. I'm not on selling. I'm not big on that. It's not my thing. I want to have a conversation with the person and find out if we're going to be a good fit for each other, first of all. But
that's probably sorry to interject. That's probably a big part of it. Kind of looking like you're going to be interacting with this person personally. So just the vibe between you and that person, even if they suck as a personal trainer, if you really like them and they get you to show up and just do the exercises, maybe that's a good trainer for you, even though that other one might know more about the things and 100%. How the body works and all that. So continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So sit down and we just have a conversation, talk about what their goals are. I find out what their previous training experience was, whether they worked out for years and maybe they've done nothing up until this point. And I also find out what kind of training they've been doing, right? So whether they've been doing real high volume, they've been training multiple days a week. And then I find out what the nutrition looks like up to this point also. Well, no matter what their goal is, it's still a good idea to find out, hey, what have you been eating? What type of stuff? How are your habits been? Have you been up and down in weight over the years? Kind of their whole health history as far as that's concerned. And actually, generally speaking, that gives me a really good idea now of how I want to start that person on a program. Because if they've been doing really heavy type training or something, I want to get as far away from that as possible, because that's the thing that they're already, say, good at, so to speak, or they're doing at the most. So if we're looking for a different adaptation, I want to try to take them away from that type of stimulus, so to speak. Okay. And then from there, once we get a feel of if we're going to work good together, then we talk about pricing, different packages, all that type of stuff. And I don't try to get them to sign anything there. I literally let them go, talk with their spouse, significant other, or just kind of vet it themselves and figure out what they want to do. I'll let them know, again, what best option is, but what it could be finances or health or busyness, all that type of stuff. And then we talk back and forth. And then I always offer to set up, allow them to do one free session, again, to get a feel for how we do things before they pay for anything. Because again, I want it to be a good experience. I want them to feel like they're going to get their money's worth. And again, it's got to be a good relationship between whether they're training with me or one of my trainers. They need to feel good about it.
Has the nutrition and the dietary part of it always been such a big part of personal training? I feel like it really is these days, and people are very conscious of what they're putting in their bodies and how that affects their workout and the gains that they get and all that. And back in the day, it was kind of just go lift really hard, take in a whole bunch of protein, and don't worry about the chemicals or the fats or any of it. It's just lots of protein, lift really hard and get really bulky. And now the nutrition plays a huge part of it. Are those the first questions you're asking? You said they are the nutritional questions. Because if they say I'm taking in 10,000 calories a day and I'm telling you I'm not going to change that, well, then maybe you got to have a lot of cardio in that workout versus more of the other thing, or you kind of have to tailor the workout to what they're willing to do nutrition wise, right?
100% true. So I'll just give you a quick example. So I have a client that she loves her wine, right? And that's just part of her life. She's a socialite. She loves to drink. And it's not like she just drinks a couple wine glasses every time she goes out, but that could be 2 to 3 times a week, right? But she enjoys that process. I'm not going to come in and say, you can't do that. But what I do say, okay, so here's what we can expect, though. I understand you don't want to give that up, and I completely understand. But let's make it best case scenario. Let's make sure that other things are in the right place. Let's make sure we're keeping your protein intake up. Let's make sure we're trying to fuel your workouts a certain way. But then it also tells me, because a lot of her calories come from alcohol, that there's certain types of training that we can't do because it can be inflammatory to the body. If we're not feeding her properly with carbohydrates and stuff, we can't do certain types of training because she's just not willing to make that step. So there's certain things that I will never take her through, and she realizes that, but because of her life choices, again, which is okay because she's a human being, she's an adult, she can do what she wants. So we just try to get her best results that we can. Because there's sometimes those trainers out there like, well, if you're not going to listen to what I say, then I don't want to work with you. And I think that's silly, because you're not going to find many clients in, because I have a handful of all of our clients, a handful that are like 100% strict all the time. And that's because they want to do that. Most people aren't like that, right? So, I mean,
us weirdos that like regiments are good at it, but most people don't like to stick to things like that. And yeah. So what you mentioned, you like to shock the body and kind of you figure out what they were doing, and then you like to change it up so that you can get some improvements. Do you, in your course of workouts with people over time, do you switch up the workouts and maybe explain a couple of the workouts, some examples maybe.
This is some. I'm always constantly learning. I'm just going through tons of courses. I spend thousands of dollars on continuing that every year. And this is something that more recently, a company that I work with called N1 Education, N1 Training, they built their own lab. And this is a lot of stuff they find. So the term periodization, okay? I mean, basically you're changing what you're doing and you're doing something else. The generic term would be like muscle confusion, which isn't a real thing necessarily. But what we do is change the type of stimulus that we're doing, okay? So here's what that means. So there's three main drivers of stimulus. So you have hypertrophy, which is like muscle growth. You have metabolic training, which is basically conditioning the tissue that you have. And then there's neurological training where you're basically training your brain to contract the muscle at a high rate, very efficiently, okay? So then there's subcategories though, but in that essence, what we do is we go from one stimulus to the next, to the next, to the next. That way, one, we get a deload from this, right? So if you keep doing the same thing all the time, you're going to eventually top out on your results and you're just going to be grinding away. Sometimes people do this for years and never see a change. And one of the reasons is because they haven't changed the adaptations of the body, right? So what we do is more like a stair step. We'll focus on one goal, and that may be their main goal. So maybe their goal is body composition. They want to build muscle. They want to change how their physique looks. So we might do that 70% of the time. But every so often, we're going to jump out and we'll condition the muscle with some different metabolic type stimulus. And then we'll go back to hypertrophy. Or we'll jump out and we'll do some neurological training, like a strength phase, where we can focus on the neurological adaptation of the brain to muscle connection, and then we jump back. So doing that tends to allow people to continue progress with results for the longest period of time. And then we also, in those programs, we also will adjust nutrition accordingly. So when we're doing a metabolic program, we're going to use a lot more ATP and a lot more carbohydrate during those workouts. So during those phases, we can, again, adjust people's nutrition, allow them to eat more food during that time. Again, but this all comes down to adherence, because if people aren't really, so you know what I mean? Like, this is a perfect case scenario that we would do this with every single client. Sometimes it's not the case, right? This is the trainer's ideal situation, but we can't do that with everybody. So we just take best case scenario and we'll manage those expectations with the client of, hey, let's do this a little bit here, a little bit there. But yeah, we do change things up, but that's how we approach things versus just doing one day high rep, one day low, because that's called like the kitchen sink method. And that tends to get the least amount of results long-term, is doing a little bit of everything versus just narrowing down and focus on something for a period of time and then changing it, going from that, if that makes sense.
And I feel like these days, a lot of this is way more trackable. Again, back in the day, even my day, back in Woody's, the people that remember Woody's and then whatever was after that in that same place was everybody just walked around with a notebook, a lined notebook and their pencil and stuff. But these days you've got wearables, you got rings and bracelets and all kinds of things to track everything, the reps, the steps, all the things. And I'm sure there's things that you have access to that also the consumer doesn't. So what role does tech play in all this these days?
So tech's awesome. And again, this is how it helped us as a training community, the people who tap into it. There's plenty of people at the gym who still walk around with notebooks. I get it. They're old school at what they want to do, right? They're jotting down every single, rep, set, all that type of stuff. So we partnered with a company called Periodization. And what that allowed us to do was a couple of things. One, we can track pretty much every metric on there. Body fat, weight, sleep, steps, body measurements, body fat, all that type of stuff on there. It also will sync with different food tracking apps. So that's how I can track people's nutrition. So I can give them a specific goal, maybe a macro breakdown, a calorie breakdown, but then I can see what they're eating on a daily basis. It allows me to see all of that. And then we also built out
how much of that is based on them telling the truth? And do you have issues with people cheating? Or I mean, I wouldn't think they would have any reason to, but I'm sure some people do.
Well, sure they do, because I mean, we're still humans, right? And we don't want to be like reprimanded. Even though I'm not that guy. I'm not the person to yell at someone. I'll hold them accountable as much as they want to be held accountable too, right? So actually, a meta-analysis just came out, which is basically a study of studies, just came out this week about people, men and women, tracking food. And what they found out was, on average, women underreport over 400 calories a day of what they actually think that they're eating. And guys, it's over 500 calories. So even people that are tracking underreport significantly. And it's funny because sometimes my clients think I don't know that, right? So, and again, there's nothing when I come up with the equations and all this for to figure out how many calories they should be, they should be in a certain area, but there's still outliers, right? They could be a little bit higher, a little bit lower. But there's certain times where I'm like, okay, we'll drop down. But I don't like to take people super low. My goal is to feed people as much food as they're comfortable with and as I can, essentially, to allow them to still achieve the result that we want. I don't starve people because that never works long term, these crash diets, okay? But I still know at a certain point, they probably should have lost weight. And they're still not. And they're like, no, I swear I'm tracking everything. And it could be one or two things. Maybe they're just not being honest, or they're just not tracking appropriately. That when they put down that they had a tablespoon of peanut butter, it was actually 2 or 3. And instead of 200 calories, it was 600 calories, right?
And I did go out Saturday night for like 5 hours, which is probably like 10,000 calories worth of Cosmos and whatever else.
And little things like that. And sometimes people don't know how to track alcohol appropriately either, right? So there's no such thing, you've heard this term and at some point in time, I'm sure, is empty calories. There's no such thing as an empty calorie. All calories count for something. That term came from, it doesn't count nutritionally towards your body. For sure, that's a thing. But alcohol is not an empty calorie. It is a real thing, okay? So every gram of alcohol is 7 calories per gram, right? So then on top of that is also going to be any type of carbohydrate that might be with it too. So maybe there's healthier options, but there's no such thing as an empty calorie. And again, all that stuff adds up. And I get to see that data. And again, I don't recommend people. I just try to make other adjustments, in the program which is totally fine. That's the business of working with people. So.
Yeah, and you mentioned it in not crash diets, and you're obviously all about, and I promote just a healthy diet, something you can sustain and is healthy and has hopefully some vitamins and vegetables included with it. But I'm sure there are some dietary things that you do when you're trying to achieve certain things, or if someone says, I want to put 10 pounds of muscle on, do you change the diet in some way for that, or they're trying to lose weight? Obviously less calories, but for certain things, do you change dietary things for people?
Yeah, I mean, so depending on what the goal is, we can take a couple different scenarios. If someone's goal is to gain weight, one of the biggest things we need to make sure that they're in a calorie surplus, right? So to build muscle is an energy dependent process, right? So we're building something, so we need energy to build that process. So too many people get caught up on what's called recomping their body, meaning trying to add muscle and lose fat at the same time. It is possible for someone who's completely untrained to do that, meaning they've never done anything in their life and they just want to go to the gym, they start exercising. We can do that. But someone who's been working out for years and years and years, it's not that it's impossible, but it's a really long, slow, drawn out process because we're trying to do two different things then. We're trying to build muscle, which you need energy for, and then you're trying to lose fat, which is we need a negative energy balance to do that. So you're trying to do two different things. Okay.
Are people's bodies generally kind of trained to do one of those two things? Like my body's really good at staying thin, but not really good at building muscle.
Sure. Yeah. And that's just mostly a genetic component, right? So the comparison of you've seen people that literally can just do a couple push-ups and it looks like they put on 5 pounds of muscle in a matter of a week. And then you have other people who maybe like you, like if you could hit the gym for weeks and months and years, and then an accomplishment would have been put on 10 pounds over, 5 years maybe, right? And a lot of that's just a genetic component of
that long.
Well, I'm saying, no, it depends on the nutrition too, right? So if you're eating at a calorie surplus, but this is what's opposite of what people think. You actually are very bad at using energy, and that's why you're thinner, okay, versus good at it. Okay, because the reason you're bad is your body is maybe processing chemicals and the thermogenesis that happens when you eat food is happening so fast, your body doesn't have a chance to use that for energy and you're expelling it, right? So you're actually not good at using energy, okay, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but that's why it's hard for you potentially to add muscle mass. And I have clients like that, right? But the general consensus is, okay, we want to add some muscle mass. We need to put you in a calorie surplus. It doesn't need to be a lot. Usually 200 to 300 calories above your total daily energy expenditure, okay, which makes up your total metabolism, tends to be pretty sufficient enough to be able to add muscle mass efficiently. You don't need to be in these huge bulking phases but again, as you eat more and more, your metabolism will also start to increase. So wherever that might stop, we don't know. You just have to keep increasing calories until the point in time where you're finally actually gaining weight, okay? And then obviously then training for hypertrophy or muscle growth would be ideal in that situation. Okay. And then the opposite is true well, eating protein, carbs, the ratio protein's always king, no matter what. Okay, because protein, one, we need it to build muscle tissue. It's called muscle protein synthesis. It's a thing other than resistance training that stimulates the process of growing muscle. Takes a minimum of 20 grams of protein to even stimulate that process, okay, of high quality protein. So if you're literally sitting down and you're not eating 20 grams of protein in a meal, it's not that it still won't work. It's just you're not optimizing that system, okay? And then obviously carbohydrates are one of the main fuel sources when we exercise. So eating enough carbohydrates that we're fueling our workouts, unless people are carbohydrate intolerant, I like to feed people carbohydrates. We don't run from carbs. So our carbs don't make us fat, and excess of calories do, whether it comes from carbs or fat, okay? So we try to utilize that system. And then the opposite, if we're trying to lose weight, I actually will usually increase protein slightly more than whatever equation I would use to figure that out. We actually want a little extra protein to help build tissue or maintain the tissue that we had built at that point in time, but also then being a calorie or negative calorie deficit to drop body fat. But again, the body is always metabolically adapting. So when we drop calories, our metabolism's going to start to come down with it. Okay. And eventually we get to the point where we can do diet breaks, which when we go back to like maintenance calories, we can do reverse dieting where we increase calories to try to maintain people's metabolisms long term. So they don't get to the point where we're eating at 900 calories a day and they're not losing weight. That is a very, very bad place to be. We don't want to take people there.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a nice way to live.
No.
And last nutrition question for us plant-based people out there.
Yep.
And that's coming into even the bodybuilding arena, people being plant-based and everything. Is there a favorite protein or any tips for us plant-based people if we're trying to build muscle? That tends to be the gripe.
Sure. So the reality is animal protein's a little more optimal for building muscle, but doesn't mean plant-based people cannot build muscle tissue. The thing that, generally speaking, though, has to happen a few ways. One, you can buy some type of plant-based protein powder that has a mixture of different protein sources, pea protein, corn protein, whatever it may be. But the key is it needs to have all the amino acids, especially leucine, to be able to stimulate, again, muscle protein synthesis.
So is that something they add into that powder?
They will. Yeah, they usually do. Yep. And again, you'll usually find plant-based protein will become in blends because not the only type of protein that's plant-based that has all the amino acids is soy. And soy is still kind of like up in the air whether people should be eating a ton of it or not. You know, there's potential stuff with some hormones. Honestly, I don't know enough to say whether that's good or bad. I just tend to try to stay away from soy as the most consumed protein for anybody, right? Because there's pea protein, there's rice protein, there's different ones. But you sort of make sure that you're getting a blend so you get all the amino acids. Plus, again, leucine being the main driver of muscle protein synthesis. And if you're just going to stick with as far as food, it's going to be almost impossible to consume just food on its own to get enough protein for most people, right? Generally speaking, you're going to have to supplement something if your goal is to build muscle tissue.
And are there any, I know some supplements out there, a good portion of them are garbage. Are there a couple good brands for protein powder or supplements or anything you could point people to? Honestly, or maybe you sell it or whatever?
Yeah, so I don't sell anything. I take Jim Supplement Science stuff, and he actually just came out with a plant-based protein. I've used a lot of his stuff for protein powders, pre-workouts. And again, we can talk about the pre-workout stuff. I tell most people not to spend their money on that because it's going to give you maybe 2 to 3% advantage in the gym. And sometimes it's just not worth the money for most people, okay? Or another protein powder that I use, and they do have a plant-based run, is a company called Steel Protein. Company's called Steel, Steel, and their stuff's great too, tastes well. But they also have plant-based blends that are pretty well. So, yeah, I mean, anything that's out there, most of the stuff today is pretty decent. And I couldn't have said that 20 years ago, but a lot of these companies get vetted now by independent sources, so they're not putting out a lot of junk anymore because these independent companies, one that I subscribe to called Consumer Labs, and they test protein powders, vitamins, supplements to make sure that what these companies are putting in them actually is there, right? So a lot of them had to get on board with, one key thing is like staying away from proprietary blends and a lot of stuff. Because the problem with proprietary blends is you have no idea how much of anything is in it, right? So it'll list like 2,000 milligrams, but then 15 things, and you literally have no idea how much any of them in there. And FDA doesn't regulate anything, so as long as there's basically trace amounts of those, they can put that on the label, and no one's going to know, unless there's independent companies that'll come in and test that stuff.
So just do your research a little bit, and if it's a big name, they're probably doing a good product by now.
Generally speaking, yes.
And then, so in the workouts, so with dietary, you're switching it up. You might be low calorie, high protein, whatever. On the workout side, are there different things you need to do if you want to say build muscle, lose weight? Maybe those two things go into different things you could do to accomplish those two things.
So one of the things we pride ourselves at with Next Generation Personal Training and what we've learned from and one of some other sources. So the first thing you need to know is what stimulates muscle growth, right? Some people don't know that, right? So there's all these different theories out there. The only thing they know for sure that stimulates muscle growth is tension on the sarcomere, which is basically this. So if you take a muscle cell and you break it down to the cellular level, you have a sarcomere, which is like an individual muscle fiber. Okay, so stay with me here, and this will make sense. In those muscle fibers, they cross like this, okay? So if I flex my bicep, these muscle fibers shorten, and if I lengthen it, they lengthen, okay? It's called the sliding stomach theory. These proteins are called actin and myosin. Where they cross here is what's called the Z line, okay? And the tension that is produced on that Z line during exercise is the only thing they know that stimulates muscle growth. So if we take that back to the gym, our goal is to maximize tension on the desired muscle that we're trying to stimulate for growth. So this is where form, technique, execution, all that stuff matters the most, right? So if I'm trying to do a bicep curl and keep all the tension on my bicep, the moment I start swinging my body or I add shoulder flexion or any type of stuff, it's going to decrease tension. Therefore, stimulus goes down. And that goes for everything. So understanding origin insertions of muscles, where the muscle bellies lies, all different types of scapular plane, all this type of stuff that matters when setting up exercises appropriately. And then, the end result is trying to maximize tension on that desired muscle. Again, and that is if our goal is for muscle growth. But when it's not, even if it's a metabolic program and we're trying to recomp someone and allow them to drop body fat, our form and technique shouldn't change. We still want to maximize the effort, but we might change tempo, how fast and slow we're doing something. We might shorten rest periods. And then we also can change what's called resistance profiles and make exercises heavier or lighter in certain positions, and we'll actually get a different physiological response when we do that. Okay, so it's pretty in-depth stuff, but that's what we really focus on when we're in the gym setting. But it all comes down with making sure that we set up the exercise properly to maximize the result that people are getting. Okay. So
it sounds like no matter what the result, the form matters. So I'm not wrong in 100%. Looking at that dude at the gym every time that's over there, like doing everything all jerky and looks like he's going to throw his back out at any second. You'll be like, dude, you shouldn't do it that way.
The deceptive thing is some of those guys look awesome, right? So some of these guys that throw the weights around and lift like, idiots or whatever, I'm glad they're in the gym doing something. But that being the example, that's not good for most people, right? But the problem is that those people probably have maybe decent genetics and they work really, really hard. So they still can accomplish an impressive physique. But that's how Instagram is full of people like this, right? So then you see some guy or girl who's in great shape and you think they know what they're doing just because they look good. And this is stuff that I have to deal with when people come to me with oh yeah, well, what about this person? This person, that's irrelevant. One, you're not that person. You don't have their genetics. You might not be eating like they are, right? And you also might not be working as hard as they are in the gym. So stop thinking that you should be that person or could be that person, so to speak, right? So
yeah, there are a million variables and even variables that are illegal that people could be doing that they're not telling anybody about. That makes a huge shortcut there. So would you say higher reps to build muscle, or where do reps come in the reps? High weight, low weight, high reps, low reps. That's usually the question. Sure. Is it what we all think? If I'm trying to build it, I need higher weight, less reps, or am I wrong?
No. So here's the consensus. It doesn't matter as long as you take sets close to failure. So back to the tension thing, okay? A couple things maximize tension. There's something called the effective rep theory in training, that it's the last 5 reps approaching failure that stimulate muscle growth the most, okay? And here's why that is. tension is maximized on slow eccentrics. That's the lengthening phase of the muscle. So if I'm doing a bicep curl, if I'm at the top and I'm lowering the weight down, that's the eccentric. So controlling that maximizes tension, and slow concentrics on the way up. But here's the caveat to that. It's not because you purposely went slow. Actually, you should use a pretty intentful concentrics. Like, so I should try to come up with some force. But as you approach failure, rep speed decreases, right? Those last couple grinder reps, when you're like barely moving the weight, that's when force tension relationship is the highest. So controlling the weight through your range of motion, but specifically taking them close to failure, is what's going to stimulate the most amount of muscle growth. So you can actually achieve that with higher, moderate, I mean, anywhere from 6 to 8 rep range, to 10 rep range, all the way up to the 20 rep range. The downside of going to the high rep ranges is there's then a lot of more metabolic output and more biochemical stuff going on, oxidative stress, all these type of things that then can take you a lot longer to recover from. Okay, so it can be done, but it would make more sense, and this is what we do, is we'll program that in on occasion. And we never go to high reps. What we do is more, when we're doing metabolic training, we do more like incomplete rest. So it'd be like 8 sets of 8 reps with 30-second rest periods. So you get some recovery of glycogen and ATP in between sets, which is the energy, again, other muscles work off of, right? Instead of just taking it to complete failure. But throughout subsequent sets, we then approach that very high tension relationship. And that tends to keep oxidative stress low, because oxidative stress causes inflammation. Inflammation in our body is, in short term, is okay. Chronically is not good. So we don't want to train this high rep all the time. Okay. And again, it takes longer to recover from that type of stuff. So when our goal is specifically hypertrophy, we tend to stick between that 6 to 12 rep range with a little bit heavier weights. Again, simply so you can recover faster between workouts.
So it sounds like no matter what your goal is, the failure point is kind of what you're trying to achieve, that failure point. I have 2 questions related to that before we're getting close to the end, but I have 2 questions before we get to the question that has nothing to do with anything. So having to do with the failure point, is spotting okay? Do you want a spotter? Is a spotter good to help you get that last one, or should you just fail on that last one? How does one spot correctly?
Here's a couple of things. So if you have a spotter, utilize the spotter. One thing about being a good trainer is being a good spotter, right? So and we work off a system what's called RPE, it's rate of perceived exertion. So basically each set, we take it a little bit further with intensity as we then approach failure. We don't ever go to failure on set 1, okay? Because there's just so much, trauma to the tissue and inflammation, and basically our subsequent sets will be less. You won't be able to do as well, right? So, but as we approach later sets and we get close to failure, being a good spotter is a great thing. Now, if you don't have a spotter, that you can still take things to failure, but just make sure you do it on safe exercises. Okay, you want to take a back squat to failure, but you could take a leg press to failure, and it's pretty safe as long as you again set the safety bars where they need to be. And if you get close to failure, you can always just push on your legs. We're doing things like leg extensions, hamstrings, all those types of things that you can brace against that are safe exercises to take to failure. Those are the things that you want to take to failure. A bench press, if you're by yourself, probably not a good idea to take it to failure. Within a couple of reps, sure. But on a machine press, sure, you can take it to failure, or a chest fly. Those types of things, that's generally the rule of thumb. If you can have a spotter, awesome. And then utilize that person on later sets to take yourself to failure, or even past failure potentially. But if you're by yourself, just make sure you pick safe exercises to go to failure on, not things that you're going to kill yourself on.
Yeah. I mean, the spotting is, I didn't even think about that. Hiring a trainer, if you're trying to do, machines are great and everything, but it's good to do free weights because you get all these stabilizer muscles, yada, yada, you get a better workout. But you can't hit that maximum failure point if you don't have a workout buddy. And a lot of us were working and we can't get to the gym every day with our workout buddy to have a spotter. So having a trainer, that's a big part of it. And make 100%. Sure your trainer smells good and they wear deodorant and these are all the things that matter, right? Totally. And they don't sweat profusely all the time. Although is this a fallacy? Sorry, I'm getting off track with my second question about this, but do people that sweat fast, that means you're in good shape? That's what you're well hydrated and in good shape because your body's efficient? Yeah. I mean, partially yes and partially no. Sometimes it just has to do with your sweat glands too. Some people have like hyperactive sweat glands, so they just sweat. I have clients that are more overweight that
like never sweat, or vice versa. I have the same. And or my fiance like never sweats. Like she has to like sprint on the treadmill like minutes on minutes, and then she finally like she'll get a bead of sweat. So I mean, and she works hard.
She's like, ding.
Yeah, it's crazy. So
like
me,
some princess running on the. She never sweats.
Yeah.
She never
I
smells.
walk outside. I'm like,
smell
oh my
like.
gosh, I'm sweating. Like she's legit the princess, and like she just, I don't know, she glistens. You know, she doesn't really sweat much. So yeah.
That's funny. Okay, my second question about the failure point thing is being sore. That's kind of like my goal. If I'm working out, I want to be sore afterwards, or else I feel like I didn't do enough. Should we be sore? Should we be sore every time? Is being too sore bad? Is there an overdoing it?
Yeah. So soreness, from what, it's not an indicator of muscle growth. Okay. Soreness is an indicator of two things. One, trauma to the tissue. Okay, meaning you caused enough damage to the tissue that you now have soreness, like micro tears to the tissue. Secondly, another thing that causes soreness is actually inflammation of the nerves. So when we take a muscle to a fully lengthened position, the sheath around that nerve also stretches. Now, if you do that enough over time, it's going to cause inflammation to that nerve. Okay, so those are the two things that cause inflammation. There's certain phases that we'll go through in training. Like it's called a mechanical damage hypertrophy phase, where our goal is to cause trauma to the muscle. Now, I'm going to go a little more depth in this. And the reason we do that is it increases what's called myonuclear domain. So you have satellite cells in your body that are floating around for certain times of, sickness, disease, trauma to the tissue, and it'll donate its organelles to other areas of the body. So when we cause significant trauma to a tissue, your muscle cells will get those nuclei, mitochondria, the nucleus of that cell. So therefore, we go to other types of phases, we can be more proficient, all that type of stuff. But the things that cause the most amount of mechanical trauma are overloaded lengthened position exercises, super slow eccentrics, instead of like maybe 3 seconds down where you're like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then pausing in those lengthened positions, whatever the exercise may be. That causes the most amount of trauma. But that does not.
You're describing exactly what climber. I practice dead hanging with holding positions.
Yeah.
And
you'll probably get super sore, right? You're like, oh my gosh, my lats and everything is like really sore, right? So that's not an indicator of muscle growth. It's just a cause of so some soreness is okay. That's gonna happen, right? No matter what, especially when someone's brand new, there's going to be trauma to the tissue because they're not used to anything. Now, some soreness is good. One thing you don't want to happen is being sore for 4 and 5 days. That means you probably overdid it, right? And you also don't. So when we take people through mechanical damage phases, we usually only do it for 2 to 3 weeks because it is a super inflammatory process, and we don't want to stay there for a long time. So we might take you through a block of that to get the adaptation, but then we transition out and we'll periodize and do something else for a period of time. So again, it's not a bad or good thing. It can be a good thing depending on adaptation. We just don't want to do it forever and make that be our goal. Not just doing sets on reps and sets and reps and sets until you like are completely demolished. That's usually more counterproductive than it is productive.
Huh. So yeah, that was pretty much every time in high school. We just, if I'm not sore or you hit that. So what does that mean if I lift chest or whatever, and I'm not getting sore anymore, and it's like, you're to that point where I can almost do unlimited stuff, a failure kind of go, and I never get sore. I just need to change out the workout completely.
No, not even necessarily.
But I'm not trying to get sore. So how do I even know when I am pushing it hard enough to?
Here's how we know. Are we progressing in the goal of that we're trying to accomplish, right? So maybe it's a strength goal. So are you getting stronger week after week or bi-weekly? Like, and this is where tracking comes into play. People don't have, it depends. This all goes back to how specific and how detailed do you want your goal to be, right? And if you want to keep progressing, tracking's not a bad idea. Tracking food, tracking your workouts. Okay, so have I not progressed in my workout for 6 weeks? Am I doing all the same amount of reps, same amount of weight, all that type of stuff? Then it's probably a pretty good indicator. And I would say even before that we need to change something up, right? But remember, I know mentally wise, we feel like we need to be sore because we need to feel like we're working hard enough to get sore. But don't let that be, because if you're still progressing or you're adding muscle tissue, you're getting stronger, but you're not getting sore, then it's okay. Keep progressing towards your goal. And maybe one time you are sore, and it could be a million different things. Maybe nutrition was off the day, you didn't sleep well, or whatever, just stress is bad at work. That can increase inflammation and therefore cause you to be a little more sore just because a couple things are a little bit more off.
Huh. Well, I like your answer to that. It lets me off the hook a little bit and
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
stops me from
So
doing
here's
damage
the thing.
that I
A
was
rule
probably
of
doing all this
thumb.
time.
A rule of thumb is you literally want to do as little as possible to achieve the result that you want. And most of the time, less is more. Because when we focus on dialing in every single set, every single rep to perfection or the closest that we can, we'll get more out of every rep. Therefore, we don't have to do as many reps, and we'll get more out of every set. So we don't have to do as many sets to get the results that we want. And then we can recover faster. So then we can train that muscle more often, and then that'll progress our results faster.
Huh. And where do you stand on, real quick, we got to move to the random question, but stretching. Yeah. I feel as I get older, I got to stretch or I'm going to hurt something, right? Especially climbing. My tendons need to warm up, blah, 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 before I really go for it.
So I'm not a huge fan of stretching arbitrarily. Here's why. Tight muscles are an indicator of a nervous system response telling you that there could be an injury, so therefore the muscle tightens up, right? It's not that the muscle's actually tight, because it's just muscle tissue. It's literally soft tissue, right? It's not something that's like rock bone. But the moment you're going into a stretch slightly, your brain's like, oh no, don't go there, and it'll contract the tissue, and then all of a sudden now it feels tight and I can't go any further, right? So generally what we do throughout different phases is we teach people how to use appropriate amounts of active range of motion. And what that means is taking your joints and your muscles as far as they can go safely where they're meant to go, right? So if I can take my shoulder to this position, that's where I want to be. Now, if I start pushing into an object to take it further, generally what happens is, one, I'm compressing the joint, which can increase the risk of injury. And I'm also now taking my tissue further than it maybe should be going. And now if I don't have strength in that position, I also now increase my risk for injury. So I've had tons of clients that have come with tight muscles, and over time, fixing weaknesses in certain muscles. Sometimes it's the muscle that they're tight in that's weak. So if you have tight hamstring, sometimes it's because you have a weak hamstring. So we can strengthen that muscle, train it through its full contractile range, lengthen it and shorten, and accidentally, so to speak, over time, you'll gain range of motion and the muscle won't be tight anymore. So that's, again, there's nothing wrong with training of stretching per se. You just have to use it everything's appropriate at a certain time, right? But more often than not, people don't stretch appropriately, and they're overstretching things, and they're becoming hyper flexible, and then they're actually increasing their risk for injury long term.
Which I think I've been a culprit of that. You've already taught me a few things in this interview that I'm going to take with me. Where are we at? 3 minutes. All right, we're going to go quick. You pick a number between 1 and 350, and it's going to be a random question.
325.
25. I'm going to say no, because that was yesterday, which is so weird that you picked the same one. And I remember what it was.
So I'm going to pick a different one?
Yeah.
227.
All right. Went up high with it that time. All right. No one's gone that high yet. 227. Do you like things to be carefully planned, or do you prefer to just go with the flow?
All right, quick response. Both. So I like to plan out my life, my situation, all that type of stuff, but spontaneously, I do like to do things on occasion, for sure. So.
Nice. And I'm going to say all your stuff here quick so that we get this done, so I can upload this to IG. Everybody can go to nextgenerationpt.net to find them, nextgenerationpt2525@gmail.com. And the phone number is 570-721-1293. Again, 570-721-1293. nextgenerationpt.net for everybody listening to it later. If I ever upload those to iTunes, everybody else, you can see it in the description and click the link and all that kind of stuff. We also have a promo going, 10% off training and nutrition packages. Just give the promo code NG10 or mention the episode or whatever. He'll probably know what you're talking about if you mention the episode. What announcements did I got? I'm going to keep it short. I don't need to say anything. If you're watching this somewhere other than Facebook, on LinkedIn or Instagram or anywhere else, head over to Facebook and join our Facebook group. That's where we found each other, right? I posted for some guests, and you, I think, reached out and scheduled an episode. But in Central PA supports small business. A lot of good things happening in there. If you need to buy or sell a house, please reach out to me. Call, text, email, send a rock through my window, send a carrier pigeon, whatever you need to do. We still need inventory like crazy. Thanks for watching and listening. And a call to action I'm trying to put out every time now is, right now, go to your favorite business and give them a review on Google specifically, because that helps them when people go to the Googles and search for best personal trainer around or best plumber or whatever. That's going to help your favorite one bump to the top and get some business. So I want everybody, when you hang up from this episode or stop watching this episode, go search. And if you want to search and do it for Brock, that would be awesome. Or anyone you like, go and search him out and give him a review. Again, thanks for watching and listening. And thanks for being here, Brock. Say goodbye.
Appreciate it.
See you, everybody.
See ya.